They laughed at the color, they questioned the texture. Some saw gumbo and thought America had simply emptied yesterday's leftovers into one pot. But what happens when the dish they dismissed becomes the one they cannot stop eating? What if the mess in that bowl is actually centuries of Louisiana history, patience, and flavor working together? One spoonful can embarrass a stereotype faster than any argument ever could. Looks can't taste. A bowl of gumbo can lose the beauty contest before the spoon even reaches the table, and that may be exactly why the first taste becomes such a surprise. To someone raised on cleaner looking plates, separate ingredients, lighter sauces, or dishes arranged with a little more visual order, Louisiana gumbo can seem almost suspiciously busy. The broth is dark, the texture can be thick, seafood or sausage may be sharing space with vegetables and rice, and everything looks like it has been invited to the same Southern family reunion without checking the seating chart. That visual reaction says more about cultural expectation than it does about the food itself. Across parts of Europe, diners are used to cuisines where appearance can communicate structure very clearly. In France, classical restaurant traditions often emphasize sauces, portions, and presentation with recognizable boundaries. In northern Italy, a plate of risotto may be creamy, but the dish still presents itself as one unified idea. British stews can be hearty and rustic, yet their ingredients are usually familiar enough that the eye knows what category it is looking at. Gumbo arrives with fewer introductions. It simply sits there looking dark, rich, crowded, and completely unconcerned about winning approval from Instagram. That is where the joke begins. American food is often judged abroad through its loudest stereotypes: giant portions, fast food, processed cheese, sugar, grease, and combinations that supposedly exist because somebody in a parking lot said, "Why not?" Anyone arriving in the United States carrying only that picture can easily assume a bowl like gumbo is proof of the case. Then Louisiana quietly ruins the argument with one spoonful. Because gumbo is not random food thrown into hot liquid, the depth comes from technique. A carefully cooked roux can take time and attention, while ingredients such as okra, filet powder, seafood, chicken, or sausage contribute different textures and layers depending on the regional recipe. What looks loose and improvised from across the table can actually be the result of generations of cooking knowledge. That difference matters during something as culturally mixed as the 2026 World Cup in America. Visitors may arrive expecting the version of the United States they have repeatedly seen through headlines, television clips, online arguments, and fast food imagery. Yet daily life has a funny habit of being more complicated than the trailer. Somewhere between American hospitality, regional traditions, enormous grocery aisles, neighborhood restaurants, and a steaming bowl of Louisiana food, the stereotype starts developing cracks. Gumbo becomes a perfect little American ambush because it refuses to dress itself up for strangers. It asks people to taste before deciding, and once that spoon goes in, the bowl that looked like leftovers starts behaving more like a jazz band. Every ingredient seems to be doing something different, yet somehow, everybody knows when to come in. Perhaps that is the most American part of the gumbo. It does not need to look familiar before it becomes memorable. Sweet meets crispy. There's a particular moment when American food stops asking permission from European logic, and chicken and waffles may be one of the clearest examples. Fried chicken arrives hot, salty, peppery, and crackling at the edges, while a waffle sits underneath waiting for butter and maple syrup like it has wandered in from breakfast and decided to stay for dinner. On paper, the pairing sounds like two completely different meals accidentally sharing the same plate. In America, that accident became a classic. The fascinating part is not simply that Americans combine sweet and savory flavors, because Europe certainly does that too. The difference is how confidently the United States pushes those flavors into the same bite. In Belgium, waffles are strongly associated with sweet toppings, powdered sugar, fruit, or chocolate, while fried chicken belongs to a completely different culinary lane. Britain has its own affection for combining savory meat with sweet sauces, from pork with applesauce to turkey with cranberry sauce. Yet those pairings usually keep a polite distance from dessert territory. Chicken and waffles ignores that boundary with the enthusiasm of someone removing a velvet rope from a nightclub. That freedom is precisely what makes the dish so memorable. The first bite can seem almost engineered to confuse the brain pleasantly. The chicken gives salt, crunch, fat, spice, and heat, while the waffle contributes softness and a toasted sweetness. Maple syrup then slips into the cracks of the crust, turning something that should theoretically be too rich into a strangely balanced combination of savory, sweet, crisp, and fluffy. Food scientists often describe flavor enjoyment in terms of contrast, and this dish practically turns contrast into a full-time occupation. There's also a very American generosity built into the portion itself. A proper plate frequently looks less like breakfast and more like breakfast bringing its cousin from Sunday dinner. That visual abundance has long been part of American restaurant culture, especially in diners and Southern-style establishments, where the meal is meant to feel satisfying before the first bite even lands. Chicken and waffles also reflect something broader about American cooking. Rules are useful until somebody discovers a better bite without them. The dish became especially associated with Black American culinary traditions and restaurants in places such as Harlem, while other historical versions of poultry served with waffles appeared in Pennsylvania Dutch cooking. Its exact family tree is complicated, which somehow feels appropriate for a country where recipes travel, communities adapt them, and regional food rarely stays inside one neat box. For European visitors used to meals being more clearly divided into breakfast, lunch, dinner, savory, and sweet, this plate can feel like watching the calendar lose control of the kitchen. Then the syrup reaches the fried crust. At that point, nobody is checking the calendar anymore. What looked like an American food joke suddenly makes perfect culinary sense, and that may be why the combination is so easy to remember. America did not invent the idea that sweet and savory belong together, but it certainly gave the marriage a louder wedding. America stacked it. Some countries preserve culinary tradition by protecting the original recipe as carefully as a family photograph. America has another habit. It takes pieces of different traditions, piles them together, and somehow creates something people start craving by name. The Reuben sandwich is one of the best examples because there's almost nothing delicate about it. Corned beef, Swiss cheese, sauerkraut, dressing, and rye bread are pressed together until the cheese melts, the edges toast, and the whole thing becomes the kind of lunch that requires both hands and a little commitment. That abundance tells a much bigger American story than the size of the sandwich suggests. Across Central and Eastern Europe, several ingredients inside a Reuben would be completely familiar on their own. Sauerkraut has deep roots in German-speaking Europe. Rye bread is common across Germany, Poland, the Baltic region, and parts of Scandinavia. Preserved beef has long histories in European cooking as well. Yet putting those elements together with Swiss-style cheese and a creamy dressing, then grilling everything into one dense sandwich, feels distinctly American because the United States has always been unusually comfortable letting immigrant food traditions bump into one another. New York made this kind of mixing almost inevitable. By 1910, roughly 40% of the city's population was foreign-born, according to historical U.S. Census figures. German, Jewish, Irish, Italian, and Eastern European communities lived close enough for ingredients, techniques, and tastes to cross neighborhood lines constantly. American food grew in exactly that environment, where recipes did not always stay inside the cultural borders they arrived with. The Reuben reflects that beautifully because nobody needs a culinary lecture before enjoying it. The sauerkraut brings acidity, the corned beef brings salt and richness, melted cheese softens the sharp edges, and toasted rye keeps the whole operation from collapsing into something requiring emergency cutlery. Every ingredient has a job, although the sandwich itself looks like the kitchen manager approved overtime. This is where American food can surprise visitors who arrive expecting mostly burgers, fries, and chain restaurants. Those images are certainly part of the country, but they barely explain what American cuisine actually does best. It absorbs, it adapts, it lets communities influence one another until something new becomes local tradition. Compare that with cities such as Munich or Warsaw, where regional food identity remains closely connected to long-established dishes and specific preparations. There's nothing inferior about that approach. In fact, it is one reason European regional cuisines remain so distinctive. America simply developed under different conditions. A country built through waves of migration naturally became a place where lunch could carry several passports at once. That is why something like a Reuben can feel unexpectedly exciting during a trip through the United States. It tastes familiar in fragments, yet the final combination belongs somewhere else entirely. The experience is almost like recognizing every actor in a movie while having absolutely no idea how they ended up in the same cast. Then you take another bite and stop asking. That may be one of America's greatest food talents. Taking ingredients people already know and giving them a new reason to sit at the same table. Sauce changed everything. Some American foods become memorable because they are elegant, while buffalo wings became famous by doing almost the opposite. They arrive glossy with sauce, impossible to eat neatly, and practically designed to leave evidence on your fingers. Yet that wonderful lack of ceremony is exactly where their charm begins, because buffalo wings turn eating into something social, loud, and unmistakably American. The story is surprisingly specific. The modern buffalo wing is widely traced to Buffalo, New York, where Teresa Bellissimo is credited with serving deep-fried chicken wings tossed in hot sauce and butter at the Anchor Bar in 1964. At the time, wings were hardly the glamorous part of the chicken. They were inexpensive, often overlooked, and certainly not something most restaurants expected to build an identity around. America looked at that humble cut, added heat, butter, celery, and blue cheese dressing, then somehow created a food associated with sports bars across an entire continent. That transformation says something fascinating about American cooking. Value does not always come from expensive ingredients. Sometimes the genius lies in realizing that the part everybody ignored was waiting for the right treatment. European pub culture offers an interesting comparison. In Britain, a football crowd might traditionally gather around pies, chips, sausage rolls, or crisps, foods that are easy to understand and deeply connected to local habits. In Germany, stadium and beer hall culture has long made sausages an obvious companion to a drink. Buffalo wings belong to the same social family, but the American version adds a little controlled chaos. The hotter the sauce becomes, the more the meal starts behaving like a group activity rather than a quiet dinner. And Americans have taken that idea remarkably far. The National Chicken Council estimated that Americans consumed around 47 billion chicken wings during Super Bowl weekend in 2024 alone. Put another way, that is enough wings to give every person in the United States several pieces during a single weekend. Few statistics explain American sports food culture more efficiently than a mountain of chicken large enough to make a poultry farmer check the scoreboard. The addictive quality is not mysterious either. Buffalo sauce combines fat from butter, acidity from hot sauce, salt, heat, and the crisp surface of fried chicken. Then blue cheese or ranch dressing cools everything down before the next bite turns the temperature back up. The mouth keeps moving between heat and relief, almost like somebody installed a tiny thermostat on the plate and gave it a sense of humor. That cycle is what makes the dish so difficult to stop eating. One wing feels incomplete because the next one promises another round of crunch or spice, cool dressing, and salt. For visitors accustomed to meals where table manners remain relatively controlled, buffalo wings can also be wonderfully freeing. Nobody expects spotless fingertips afterward. The napkin pile grows, somebody inevitably discovers sauce near their wrist, and suddenly dinner feels less like a formal meal and more like participating in the event. Perhaps that is why buffalo wings fit American culture so naturally. They turned an overlooked piece of chicken into a national ritual without asking anybody to use a knife and fork. America did not make the wing fancy. It made the wing worth fighting over. Breakfast went bigger. The first American pancake stack can make a European breakfast look as if it accidentally ordered from the children's menu. 3 thick pancakes arrive on top of one another, butter starts melting down the sides, maple syrup finds every possible escape route, and suddenly breakfast has the architecture of a small wedding cake. What makes this fascinating, however, is not simply the portion. The real difference is the American idea that breakfast is allowed to feel like an event. Walk into a traditional diner in the United States, and breakfast rarely behaves like a minor meal squeezed between waking up and leaving the house. Pancakes might share the table with eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, toast, coffee, fruit, or some combination that makes the table look briefly responsible for feeding a Little League team. American breakfast culture has developed around warmth, abundance, choice, and the comforting idea that nobody should begin the day negotiating with an empty stomach. That rhythm can feel very different from everyday breakfasts across parts of Europe. In Paris, a common cafe breakfast might involve coffee with a croissant or tartine. In Italy, breakfast is traditionally lighter still, often built around an espresso or a cappuccino with a cornetto. In Spain, coffee and toast remain perfectly normal ways to begin the morning. These traditions have their own pleasures, especially when the objective is simplicity and speed, but an American diner seems to approach breakfast with a different question. If everyone is already awake, why are we being shy about it? Pancakes make that attitude visible. Their appeal depends heavily on texture because a good American-style pancake has a soft, airy center and browned exterior capable of absorbing syrup without immediately surrendering into mush. Butter brings salt and richness, while maple syrup adds sweetness with caramel and woody notes. The combination works because every forkful changes slightly depending on how much syrup has reached that particular layer. The top pancake may still have some spring, while the lower one has quietly absorbed enough maple syrup to qualify for residency in Vermont. And Americans take maple syrup seriously enough for the numbers to become impressive. According to USDA agricultural statistics, the United States produces several million gallons of maple syrup in a typical year, with Vermont responsible for the clear majority of domestic production. That means the familiar diner bottle is connected to an actual regional agricultural tradition, rather than simply being a decorative excuse to add sugar to breakfast. This is where the dish becomes more interesting than the old stereotype of Americans simply eating enormous meals. A pancake breakfast is partly about abundance, but it is also about comfort. Diners are built around refillable coffee, booths, familiar menus, and food that does not require decoding. There's something wonderfully democratic about that. Nobody needs to know which fork to use, pronounce a French sauce correctly, or understand a chef's concept before breakfast begins. A stack simply arrives and makes the morning feel generous. That can be unexpectedly charming for visitors who have mostly encountered American food through images of fast food counters. A diner pancake breakfast reveals another side of the country. Unpretentious, regional, cheerful, and deeply committed to the idea that ordinary people deserve a satisfying plate. Europe knows how to make breakfast elegant. America sometimes prefers to make sure breakfast remembers your name. 12 hours later, there is something almost comical about Texas brisket when you first understand how much patience Americans are willing to spend on a piece of beef. In many kitchens, 12 hours is enough time to cook dinner, eat it, wash the dishes, sleep, wake up, and start wondering what is for breakfast. In Texas barbecue, 12 hours can simply mean the brisket is finally getting interesting. That patience is the entire point. Brisket comes from the chest of the cow, a hard-working muscle containing plenty of connective tissue. Cook it quickly and it can fight back like a leather work boot. Give it hours of low heat, however, and collagen gradually breaks down, fat renders through the meat, smoke builds around the outside, and something stubborn becomes tender enough to pull apart with very little persuasion. Traditional pit temperatures commonly sit around 225 to 275 degrees Fahrenheit, while the large brisket can remain in the smoker for 10, 12, or even 14 hours before resting. For anyone who assumes American food is mainly about convenience, that timeline is a wonderfully awkward contradiction. Fast food may be one famous chapter of American eating, but Texas barbecue belongs to a completely different book. This is cooking that rewards somebody for waking up before sunrise, checking a fire, controlling airflow, watching temperature, and resisting the temptation to rush things. A good pitmaster can spend longer managing one brisket than many people spend flying from London to Dallas. That difference becomes especially interesting beside European meat traditions. Britain has the Sunday roast, where beef is closely tied to family meals and oven roasting. Germany has centuries of sausage making, curing, and smoked meats. In the Balkans, grilled meats play a major social role as well. Europe certainly understands what patience and meat can do together. Texas simply takes the idea in another direction. A large cut of beef, indirect heat, hardwood smoke, black pepper, salt, and enough time for the afternoon to become evening without anybody panicking. There's also something wonderfully American about how little decoration the best brisket requires. Some Central Texas barbecue places traditionally serve sliced meat on butcher paper with bread, pickles, onions, and sauce available on the side. After 12 hours of work, the presentation can look hilariously casual, as though the kitchen spent all its energy on the beef and had none left for porcelain. Yet that simplicity is confidence. The dark bark on the outside holds smoke, seasoning, and rendered fat, while the inside stays moist and tender when the cook gets it right. Each slice carries evidence of time rather than expensive garnish. That is what makes brisket so compelling for visitors who associate American cuisine with foods designed to be produced quickly. Here, the national instinct for scale remains, but speed disappears completely. And perhaps that is why Texas barbecue becomes so easy to fall in love with. You're not merely tasting beef, you are tasting somebody's willingness to wait. In Paris, dinner might reward precision. In Rome, simplicity can protect tradition. In Texas, sometimes the greatest luxury is 12 quiet hours beside a smoker and the confidence that dinner will eventually prove the wait worthwhile. Americans invented plenty of ways to save time. Brisket proves they also know exactly when not to. Cheese took over. There's a very American moment that happens when a cheesesteak lands in front of someone who is used to sandwiches behaving with a little more restraint. The bread is soft but sturdy, the beef is sliced thin, the onions are sizzling, and the cheese has stopped pretending it is merely an ingredient. It is now structural support. That is where Philadelphia quietly makes its argument. A cheesesteak is interesting because it takes something incredibly simple and pushes one idea to its limit. Richness should be immediate. There is no long introduction, no garnish trying to impress anybody, and no complicated explanation required before the first bite. The sandwich works because the meat is shaved thin enough to stay tender, the onions bring sweetness, the roll absorbs the juices without giving up, and the cheese fills every gap like it has been hired by the city to prevent empty space. For visitors from Europe, that directness can feel unusual. In Paris, a jambon beurre is beloved partly because of its restraint. Good baguette, butter, ham, and very little unnecessary interference. In Madrid, a bocadillo can be equally straightforward, often letting one or two ingredients carry the whole sandwich. Even in Germany, where hearty bread and meat combinations are common, there's often a clearer separation between the parts. Philadelphia takes that familiar sandwich logic and turns the volume knob several clicks to the right. The result is incredibly comforting. Part of the appeal comes from fat, salt, heat, and texture arriving at the same time. Warm beef releases juices into the bread, onions add sweetness, while melted cheese smooths over the sharper edges and gives every bite the same satisfying weight. Food researchers have long shown that combinations of fat, Salt and savory flavors are especially rewarding to the palate, and the cheesesteak practically looks like somebody drew that formula on a whiteboard before lunch. Philadelphia's relationship with the sandwich also turns it into something larger than fast food. Pat Olivieri is commonly credited with developing an early version in the 1930s, and the city has spent generations arguing about where to get the best one, what kind of cheese belongs on top, and whether onions should be included. At that point, the sandwich stops being lunch and starts behaving like local sports talk. That obsession is part of the charm. American regional food often becomes powerful because people defend it with the same energy they use for hometown teams. A cheesesteak in Philadelphia is tied to place in a way that a generic sandwich never could be. Travelers are not simply eating beef and cheese, they are tasting a city that has turned a straightforward working-class meal into part of its personality. And this is where the broader stereotype about American food starts looking incomplete again. The country is often reduced to chains and convenience, yet some of its most beloved dishes survive precisely because individual cities refuse to let them become anonymous. Paris has its baguette culture, Naples has pizza traditions, Philadelphia has a sandwich that requires both hands and almost certainly a napkin strategy. That may be the most lovable thing about it. The cheesesteak does not ask whether you are ready for lunch. It assumes you came hungry enough to mean it. Maybe that is the real surprise hiding behind every unfamiliar American plate. The food makes far more sense once you stop judging it from a distance and actually sit down at the table. From gumbo to brisket, these dishes carry regional pride, immigrant history, patience, and a very American willingness to experiment. Which American food do you think every European visitor should try before flying home? Tell us below, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the America people rarely get to taste.